It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. He played 10 years in the NFL. I covered it for 5. Now host a daily radio show you can listen to 3 to 6 every single day on the Team 980. All right, Logan. We got lots of news to talk about, and then we kind of have the emptying of the notebook, if you will. This is always one of my favorite things to do when I was on the beat and I was out reporting. And then I'd come back and host a weekend show or host overtime over on the Fan, and just kind of empty the notebook. Things I had, and we both have the notebooks to empty from the combine. Talk a little bit more about the quarterback position, some of the edge guys, tight ends, linebackers, etc. But let's start off with the big news yesterday. Lamar Jackson gets the non-exclusive tag, which I find fascinating. I actually really like this move from Baltimore's perspective. But then perhaps the more fascinating part of it is immediately like 5, 6 teams, all the teams you'd expect to be in on Lamar Jackson, say, hey, no, we're out on Lamar Jackson. What'd you make of the decision by Baltimore? And then teams like Atlanta, Carolina being like, yeah, we're actually good on that.
I mean, I'm not surprised really at all. I mean, I think maybe the most surprising one would be Atlanta, but I think just the contract structure is kind of wild at the moment. And I also think the fact that your boy Anthony Richardson did a good job at the combine and all that stuff is going to be significant here. Like if this was a down year for quarterback, I think his market value would be significantly higher. But right now it looks like, Stroud, Young, Richardson, Levis are guys that all those teams you mentioned, Carolina, Atlanta, will have a shot at one of them. And so I think that's definitely playing a factor in here. I'm not saying that they're kind of putting all their eggs in that basket because I don't think Lamar around the league has the value that he does in Baltimore. So what I mean by that is I think Lamar is an excellent football player, but I think when you say I have to guarantee a contract to a quarterback who's had health concerns over the last couple of years because of his play style and because of what makes him elite and great. I think a lot of teams are going to be very leery of that. And so I think that's why you're seeing kind of everyone say, you know what, the price tag is a little bit too high for us. And, we're going to go in a different direction with the quarterback spot. And I also think Atlanta, for example, like they are in a perfect spot. They're like right mid rebuild. They can probably survive with Desmond Ridder if they wanted to in that offense and, wait to find the next great quarterback. I think another thing that's important to kind of consider for some of these teams is that Caleb Williams is going to be available next year. And by all accounts, from all the stuff I've been reading, he's the Michael Jordan of quarterbacks. I've heard that comparison multiple times. So if that chip is on the table, you might say, hey, we'll stand pat and, make our play next year for the generational, Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck type of quarterback. So, I think there's a lot of reasons why I'm not surprised by it. I think the one at the top of the list, though, is Lamar's injury history and the fact that he wants the contract to be guaranteed and the fact you have to give up so much draft capital, 2 firsts to get him out of there and guarantee a contract. I think people need to understand that is a very steep asking price.
It is. The guarantees are obviously a big deal, but let's not forget what Denver gave up, for instance, for Russell Wilson last year.
Absolutely.
Which is they gave up more. And the price, 2 firsts for Lamar Jackson is not that much.
It's the guaranteed contract.
Right. And that's going to be the question now is now that Lamar has a little bit different of a market, right? He's going to have to take the best offer available, you would think. I mean, I guess there's a situation where he's like, I'll play out on this tag. That seems so incredibly stupid because he could get way more this year on a deal that's guaranteed for basically 3 years. The problem is he wants 5 guaranteed years. And I think that's an important distinction, right? Like people are like, oh, Kirk messed up the quarterback market. I got a comment like that yesterday. And it's like, Kirk didn't really change the quarterback market that much. Kirk's deal, the first one he signed in Minnesota, was 3 years fully guaranteed. You want to know who else got 3 years fully guaranteed? Most other quarterbacks. Yeah. The difference is most quarterbacks also have a 4th and 5th year that are essentially team options because the teams are basically saying, hey, this is football. Guys get hurt. Things change quickly. We want to have control in exchange for giving you all of this guaranteed money. In Lamar's case, if he were to get a market value deal, basically $200 million of guaranteed money, we want control over those last couple of years. You don't get to go out again in 3 years and hold us over the fire again. That's the trade-off. That's how these contracts always work. But it's 3 years of fully guaranteed money, which is why I've said Baltimore should always have gone, seeing if they could meet in the middle. And this is what I would do if I was a team interested in Lamar, is like, I'd try to go for 4. I would try to say, like, all right, we'll give you 1 extra year of guarantees. We're not going the full 5. No way, no how. But we're considering how good you are. We'll go 4, like 4 years, $200 million straight on the dot, and see what you can do with that number. Is the team going to go there? Probably not, but we'll see. I do think it's worth pointing out, like, Lamar Jackson is one of the best quarterbacks in football, and that seems to be getting almost lost in some of this. I understand why, because I also am someone who said I don't think that I would have given Lamar. I certainly wouldn't give Lamar the contract he wants.
Right.
But it is, to me, pretty stunning in a pretty bad NFC that a lot of these teams are out. And by the way, I kind of think that includes Washington. Like,
For sure includes Washington.
It is kind of bizarre that in Ron Rivera's we need to win right now situation, that a league MVP caliber quarterback is available. Granted, it was 2019. It was a long time ago when he actually won it. But like, his first couple of games last year, his first like quarter of the season last year was awesome. And Baltimore was right there with everybody else in the AFC, which is saying something because it was the AFC. But in a win now situation in the NFC, which I cannot say this strongly enough, is not very good. The quarterback play specifically in this conference is bad. Derek Carr might have just signed with the Saints and become the second best quarterback in the conference.
Sure.
He's certainly top 5. And he wasn't in the Raiders were like good riddance, see ya. He was the 4th best quarterback in his own division last year, and he's going to be the 5th best quarterback in the conference at worst. That Washington is not pursuing Lamar. I'm not saying I don't get it. I'm not saying it's inherently the wrong decision, but to see how dramatically they've swung from we are willing to give up a lot for Carson Wentz to we're not touching Lamar Jackson is kind of bananas.
Well, I think it's important to remember the context here a little bit. You know, like Carson Wentz was a 3rd round trade, right? Trading a 3rd round pick and $28 million. The price tag on this is drastically different.
But he's Lamar Jackson and he was Carson Wentz.
So I'm going to say this. As much as you want to say Lamar is the MVP caliber player that he was in 2019, there's been a kind of a steady decline in his passing proficiency. And I think that's something that gets teams nervous. Combine that with his injury history, combine that with the recent history of, of the quarterback in Denver, Russell Wilson. That decline of his career, kind of, I know it's happening at different times, but he's coming into a kind of a declining period. You kind of say, is it worth the risk? So I think there's a little bit of buyer beware based on recent history. I think his play style, the type of offense you're going to need to put in, I think that perception of what you need to do for him is probably pretty dramatic. You can't run the offense that you brought Eric Bieniemy in to run if you bring him in. He's going to have to tailor an offense to Lamar, which is fine. And I also think it's tough negotiating with someone who's their own agent. I think that's a tough negotiation period.
There's no doubt that is having a huge, huge, huge effect on this process.
And then I also think the fact that I really, everyone mentions Kirk Cousins. I think the contract you look at, and I think the contract Lamar is looking at, is Deshaun Watson's contract. And that contract really screwed everything up. And if I'm Lamar, I look at Deshaun's contract and I say, I have played better than him because I've actually played football the last 2 years. I've been more successful. I've been more impactful. And that's what he got. I, at a minimum, deserve that. So as much as people want to say that it's Kirk, it's really the Deshaun Watson contract, I think, that is more impactful on this and is the 1-to-1. So I don't know. To me, it's free agent quarterbacks are tough, period. Right? Because as we've seen in Washington, it's not you get the same guy that was with the last team, right? There's a learning process. There's how do you coach the guy? There's usually, in my experience, just being around the NFL, there's a little bit of a drop off, because they're getting used to new things. One of the things that makes them great, Tom Brady, even the Aaron Rodgers thing, is that they've built up this great chemistry with the team there. And now they've got to reestablish that, and that can take some time. Look at Tom Brady when he went to Tampa Bay, how long it took him to kind of turn that ship around. And they won the Super Bowl, so it worked out. But I also think that Tom Brady is an outlier, and he's the exception rather than the rule. And so I think you're bringing Lamar in, and I know he's an excellent football player, but there's a lot of risk associated with this, especially at the value that they have assigned to this. 2 first-round picks and $200 million guaranteed. It's the guaranteed money. If the wording on if the first 2 years were guaranteed and the last 2, like you were talking about, I think people will be more interested. But the $200 million for a guy who gets hurt a lot, and you have to build an offense around him, it's not worth the squeeze, in my opinion. I think that's what you're seeing here from these teams.
Yeah. By the way, Brady did win the Super Bowl in the first year, but as you said, he's an outlier.
No, but it took. But I say, like, it took. Like the beginning of that season was a sluggish start because he's like getting used to.
Sure, but if you can turn it around by the end of year one, but also
right.
he's Tom Brady.
Yes.
He's coming in doing stuff that nobody else does. Just so kind of avoiding people in the comments being like, "What do you mean it took a long time? They won the Super Bowl in the first year. You can't win it any sooner."
Right.
But like, I hear you on all that stuff. I just think the narrative is swung so wildly the other direction that it is kind of crazy. To me, someone should take a swing at him. I don't think you have to. And here's the other thing. I don't think he can want the Deshaun Watson contract all he wants. He's not getting it. And neither is anybody else. Joe Burrow's not getting Deshaun Watson's contract because Deshaun Watson should have never gotten his contract. And if the Browns want to do something dumb, fine. Let the Browns be morons. And it is what it is.
It's the same thing with the DeAndre Hopkins thing. It like reset the receiver market, and like all these receiver contracts got overvalued for a couple of years because everyone was like, we got to get close to matching Hopkins' contract, and that's just how it goes. And it's so like that was the big contract from last year, right? That was last year that they did that. So it's not like this was 3 years ago, and people can look at the
but if I'm another team, I'm going like we would have never given him that. No one else would have. We're not doing it. Like, just that's not on the table. And unless someone is willing to go there, which with Lamar, it seems like nobody's willing to do it, then Lamar can't create that contract out of thin air. Like, it's at the end of the day a negotiation.
Well,
and he's going to have to take the best possible offer. And I don't think the best possible offer is going to be like, it's going to look a lot more like Kyler Murray's contract than it is Deshaun Watson's, and Lamar's going to have to decide if that's good enough. And I think Lamar's cost himself money, because if he had just signed a monster deal after last year in a more traditional sense, I think he's probably in a much better place now. But like you said, there's not an agent there. And I did this longer on the show yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat myself in full here, but like, not only is the conversation between the team and Lamar tricky, Lamar doesn't have a sense of his market. An agent would. And so Lamar's probably thinking, if I can just get to this even restricted free agency, I'm going to get a monster deal. And an agent might have been able to tell him, like, nah, man, it's not going to get any better. Right. Like, teams are not going to give up 2 firsts and pay you what you want. It's not happening. Sign the deal. This is as good as you're going to get. And I think that Lamar has cost himself a lot of money in that way.
No, I agree. I think that's one of the reasons, like, everyone says, I don't need to pay an agent. I don't need an agent, but it's helpful because you're not an expert in contract negotiations. You're not an expert in legal language. You're not an expert in contract precedent from around the league. You don't have the relationships with the coaches. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that coaches, GMs, contract negotiators for the team can be a little bit more candid with an agent as opposed to a player, right? They kind of got to sugarcoat it because you still want the relationship to be good. The agent is a good buffer for that stuff. Like, like I remember having my agent telling me, like, they're not that high on you because of XYZ. He's not telling me exactly what they said, because it's probably like, we think Logan sucks and that's going to make me really upset. But he sugarcoats the whole thing, and it keeps the relationship more amicable. You don't have that person in the contract, right? You don't have the person that kind of lubricates the communication. You don't have the person that says, hey, Lamar, bro, like, I've talked to 5 teams around the NFL, talked to 10 teams around the NFL. It's not there right now. Like, what Baltimore's offering you is the best case scenario. And so that it's just going to make this whole process a little bit more gummy. I think he should have hired an agent for this. Even it's just helpful when you're dealing with numbers like this, when you're dealing with multi-billion-dollar organizations. Like, you are not equipped, I don't care how smart you are, to deal with that. If I'm like, for me, I could have done it myself because I'm signing a veteran minimum contract. It's literally like a boiler Templar plate. Just, they print it out of the computer. It's in a freaking doc titled veteran minimum. It just comes out. It's the same language everywhere you go, right? That's easy.
Right.
Just review it, make sure the language is what I want. sign it, bam, right?
You didn't need to pay Steve his percent.
Correct. Right. Steve did a great job of getting me with teams that were interested, so that's why I pay Steve his percent. But for him, this contract's gonna be nuts, right? It's gonna be nuts to read, guaranteed language, wording, all that kind of stuff, and he's gonna have to deal with all that. And I think that's a short-sighted approach by him to kind of say I need that 3% because it's going to make me more financially solvent or whatever. But really,
Right.
this is an investment in making sure this is the best contract for you.
Well, not only that, you have the ability to go back at the team a little bit. Like if
Yeah.
Lamar's like, well, you guys, the reason I haven't done XYZ is because you didn't do ABC. Well, now you got two direct sides sniping at each
Yeah.
other versus the agent being like, well, if you draft a bleeping receiver every once in a
Right.
while, like give our guys some help, not trade away his number one receiver, then maybe he would have produced a little bit more in the passing game. Like you can't do that if you're Lamar. It sounds like sour grapes. If you're his agent, like that's literally your job. There's an
Yeah.
expectation
To
thing there.
be like a sniper, like to be like a just taking shots. And that's what,
Yeah,
like,
totally.
I love my agent. Like, he's the best. And that's what he's really good at is like he cultivates a research packet. Even for me, he cultivates a research packet, statistics, analysis, opportunities, all that kind of thing. And he presents that to the team. So you have a better point of negotiation as opposed to just saying, I'm not sure Lamar's doing this, but I would assume just knowing players who negotiated their contracts in the past, like I want to be paid the same as person, but the situation is completely different. And you don't have the 1,000-foot view to kind of fully understand that in your position as a professional athlete. You're not a professional agent.
Right, totally. Other news from yesterday: Daniel Jones gets 4 years, 160 is the headline.
But it's,
82 million in guarantees. It's kind of a 2-year deal with obviously the options to go in years 3 and 4. And then Saquon gets the tag right after that from the Giants. What did you make of the move for New York and how it sets them up against the Commanders in the division?
so I think, like, obviously they were going to make a big effort to re-sign him. I think the contract, though, just looking at it real quick, seems to be the right type of fit for what they wanted. Because if you look at the guaranteed money over the 4 years, it's really like 20 million a year, and obviously there's some incentives in there, I'm sure, that kind of bump up that number. But that's an excellent number for them, I think. And obviously you see the 160, but the team doesn't look at it that way. I don't think, like, those back end numbers, that's funny money. They can renegotiate, they can push that out, they can shift some to guarantees. Like, that gives them some cap flexibility, like you were discussing. But I think it seems, based on the guaranteed money, like a good deal for them. And it gives them some flexibility with the roster to bring new people in. I think it gives them also some flexibility to kind of say, we think that, we know you did well for us last year, but we also understand that you're not a market setting quarterback. So again, I think that's all kind of the right thing. Did they overpay? Maybe. But I think when you had to extend a guy, like, this is probably best case scenario for both sides. And like I said, the guaranteed money isn't exorbitant, so it allows you to do some roster building stuff, which that team needs to do.
Yeah. I think Daniel Jones' best days are ahead too.
Yeah,
Like,
I
you
agree.
watch the growth he makes last year under Dable, and you're like, well, probably do that again.
Right.
Not necessarily make a gigantic leap times 2, but he's going to continue to get better. They understand how to use him. They understand what they want to do with him, and they did it last year with some guys that probably were better than we initially thought in terms of skill positions.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the receivers, etc. But also, they didn't really invest in those skill position guys. So what happens when they do? And obviously, keeping Saquon around is huge for them, and as they continue to develop him and diversify how they use him to try to keep him healthy over a long term. Getting him out of the backfield a little bit more, things like that. So there's a lot of, I think, positive here for New York, and like you said, also the way the contract is structured, they're able to keep the number down. From what I understand, that we don't have all the details yet,
Right.
but it sounds like it's going to be closer to like 25, I think, in the first year.
Yeah.
There's 25 guaranteed at signing. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to translate into the final cap hit for the first year, but like, they don't have a lot of cap space if they pay him 40. They're not going to pay him 40. They'll bump a bunch of that to the second year. Some of that will be dead money in years 3 or 4 if he doesn't get there, but he probably, you'd have to imagine, would be around. But I also think, like, what's the alternative is you
Right.
start over, and
Yeah.
that's just not tenable for what New York has, what they do. It's just not the smart move for them at this time. So in a division, in a conference where there's just not a lot of good quarterback play. And, there's a lot of opportunities. Dallas might be worse this year, depending on what happens with some of their guys. Philly's definitely going to be worse. They're still probably the best team in the conference, and certainly they've got the best quarterback in the conference. But like, they're going to lose James Bradbury. They're going to lose Brandon Graham. They're going to lose some of these really key guys to their success. They're going to lose one of their offensive linemen. How do they ultimately compete if you're New York? Like, you get some nice incremental progress, try to ride the continuity train, and while everyone else is getting a little bit worse, you get a little bit better. And I think that New York sets up to be fighting for a playoff spot again, and potentially dangerous when they get there.
Sure. No, I agree. I think they had to do this. I think the day ball edition spoke very well to what Daniel Jones does. They were able to elevate him, especially Kafka. I think he deserves a lot of credit as well. And so they're not making this decision in a vacuum. I think they're with him every day. They know what he can do. They know his potential upside. And like you said, like they need a quarterback. And what was Derek Carr signing? Do you have that in front of you?
His was 150 total. Let me see if I can pull the actual.
But so I guess what I'm saying is just like it seems like the right thing. A young quarterback, knows your system, competitive, had an excellent year last year. Seems like the right move. Kind of a piece to build around, especially in a division, in a conference that isn't very quarterback heavy. So
yeah, Carr 4 for 150. So Jones winds up getting more. It's crazy. The base salary in year one is just 7.2, or sorry, the cap hit is 7.2, 1.5 base, and then the signing bonus of 5.7 prorated. So it's like a it's a $35 million signing bonus, or sorry, 28.5 signing bonus that gets prorated out over the 5 years of the deal. But Cards is essentially a 3-year deal, 100 million. They could get out for like 11.4 in dead cap after 2025 if they want to. So I'm assuming Jones looks very similar.
Yeah.
And Carr's was 5 total. Jones is 4. So maybe that out point will be like, I'd imagine his cap hit next year is going to be astronomical.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But the other thing too is like the cap's going to jump.
Yeah.
And so,
no,
the cap's going to jump over the course of that contract. And I think this is the important thing to remember with Jones, with Lamar, with Carr, with all these guys, to kind of wrap up what we're doing here. In 2 to 5 years, there's going to be a quarterback making 60 a year. Like, we got some guys making 50. And, by the time, my guess is it's Lawrence is the guy who winds up crossing that threshold. Trevor Lawrence, in 3 years when he signs his extension, or 2 years when he signs his extension, is going to be a $60 million a year quarterback. And at that point, if Daniel Jones is 40, that seems about right. Like, we have to adjust our brains to what the new numbers are. And this happens in every sport. It happens in Major League Baseball, where you're like, that's some random right fielder. Why is he making $20 million a year? Or, in the NBA, what used to be an $18 million player was like one of the better players in the league. Now it's like a 7th man.
Yeah.
And the same is true for positions across the NFL, where, when Kirk was negotiating on the franchise tag stuff in 2016, it was like $18 million was the tag. Now the tag for Lamar, if they wanted to do the exclusive, was 45. Like, it's just a different price tag, and we have to adjust our brains on like, what is a $40 million quarterback? The answer is Daniel Jones and Derek Carr.
Right.
And that's kind of crazy. And I think we also struggled with that with with Carson last year. Like, what is a $28 million quarterback? It's what Carson Wentz should have been, but
yeah. But I mean, I think like, again, that's one of the reasons I go back to like why I said the process is good, and I still agree with that. Like, you got a quarterback in here who was starter potential at a price point that's $12 million lower than a starter. It's that, you're right. We need to adjust our perspective, and I think maybe I'm giving the Commanders too much credit, but maybe they were like a year ahead on some of this stuff. Seems
they just
possible.
They picked the wrong guy. The evaluation was off. And by the way, they didn't do the things they needed to do to support him. The offense, schematically, they did not do what they needed to do to give him a snowball's chance in hell at success.
Right.
If there was one to be had in the first place, with where kind of he is at this point in his career. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulson. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now. All right, Logan, let's empty the notebook from the rest of the
Yeah,
combine. Speaking of quarterbacks, real quick, we got into this a little deeper yesterday or last episode than I anticipated. So we don't need to go too far in.
sure.
But 4 quarterbacks are going to go top 10. I feel very, very comfortable saying that right
Seems
now.
like it, yeah.
Do you think there's anybody else that goes in the first round, and kind of what else do you have notes wise from the rest of the quarterback
Yeah, I
class?
mean, I don't think any other quarterback goes in the first round. I think a guy to keep an eye on is Tanner McKee from
Mm-hmm.
Stanford. He had a nice day throwing the football. His tape's pretty good. Obviously that offense in Stanford is not dynamic. It's very kind of one note, but he's got a big arm. He's got some tools and some traits you can build around. And
His quarterback coach is now the quarterback coach here, by the way, is his old OC at Stanford. Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, and I know, there's some positive vibes about him, at the building, and I'm sure there's a positive vibes around a lot of players right now. Like, it doesn't mean
Yeah,
they're going to go pick him up, but
right. He's not
he's
coming here.
but he's a guy with some traits, some ability, and I could see him, like if he slips to the third round, maybe you take a flyer on him, and he's your backup guy for this year. Who
Sure.
knows? But I'm not saying like they're like that's the problem with this quarterback class is it's like those those 4 guys, McKee, the kid from Purdue, Aiden O'Connell, and then it's like you start losing traits. You get into like that Taylor Heineke territory where like Max Duggan from TCU is a good mover, he's a good athlete, he's a good college quarterback, but he doesn't have the arm talent necessarily to play at the NFL level, right? And maybe you put the kid from Georgia in that second quarterback bucket. What's his name?
Stetson Bennett.
Yeah, maybe he falls in there. He threw well at the combine. So there's, the first 4, the next 3, and then it's like everybody else. And so, keep an eye on those next 3 for Washington potentially, but it seems unlikely that they go in that direction. And it just everybody else kind of lacks traits, which is, what you're
Yeah.
looking for in a starting caliber quarterback.
Let me ask you about one more guy.
Sure.
Hendon Hooker from Tennessee.
Yes. Great. Yes.
Big time traits.
Yep.
But he's also 152 years old for a draft prospect. He's 25. I think going on 26 if I'm remembering correctly. I'll double check that in a second. If
Correct.
you people
He might
I think
be 26.
yeah, he might be. I think he's going to be 26 by the draft, whether he's 25 now or 26, whatever. Point is, he's old.
Right.
And I think people
Yeah.
confuse like what that means. Like the reason that's a problem is when you're 26 years old, you should go and beat the tar out of college kids. Like it's just not a
Correct.
fair fight. You are so much more mature. You are so much more of a developed human being, physically and especially mentally, that producing, if you are good and like an actual NFL level pro, you should, despite not having NFL resources, getting to spend NFL time, all that kind of stuff, still be exceptional at college football. And so showing that you are exceptional as a 25-year-old in college football really isn't that impressive.
Right.
Now, he's got a bunch of traits. He is impressive. He's also obviously more developed. The older you are, the less room you have between where you are and your ceiling. So there's like that lack of potential, but also just evaluating the tape in production. It's not like it's a fair fight. Like I've told this story before, but not in a long time. I remember going back when I worked in Lawrence, Kansas. I would go occasionally, and I was fresh out of college. I was like 23 years old, but I went to the rec center and would play pickup against college kids, most of whom were like freshmen and sophomores. And I remember being able to just muscle them and like move them. And it's not like I, especially at that point, was a particularly big dude. I just was an adult and they were children.
Right.
And so if you have that, but also access to, a college weight room and all those kinds of things, like Hendon Hooker should have produced at a very high level at Tennessee in the same way that Stetson Bennett should produce at a very high level at Georgia, because they are adults playing against children.
Yeah.
That said, he's intriguing as a prospect. What do you make of him?
Yeah, so I'm really glad you brought him up because I totally forgot about him because he didn't run at the combine, obviously, coming off the ACL.
Yes.
But I do think that he's definitely, he might be the first guy in that second tier. I said Tanner McKee, but it might be Hooker, McKee, and then the other 2 guys I mentioned. And I think, again, his film's outstanding. He's got traits, and he's a guy that you could take a gamble on. Like, he's like in that Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, like second, third round draft evaluation. You pick him, he sits for a year. Maybe you get a starter for 2 or 3 years. Like, he does have that kind of upside. I mean, you are projecting, obviously, and he does have the limitations that you discussed, but I think you feel like, hey, if we're in a bind at quarterback, like, he's a guy that could come in and win some games for us potentially. And I've heard that he interviews very well, all those types of things. So still, I think my point holds. You've got your top four,
Yeah.
you got your middle four, whoever that middle four is, including Hooker now, and then everybody else. And there's not a lot of guys in that bottom group that you say, oh, they've got, a nice arm, they read the defense well. It's a little bit dicey. Like, for example, at the Senior Bowl when I went, the kid from Fresno, Louisville, BYU, and there was another guy that threw there, but they all looked kind of gross. Like, I don't say gross because that's mean, but it was hard for them to execute an NFL style offense. And,
Yeah.
Quarterbacks traditionally don't look great at the Senior Bowl because it's hard to play quarterback, but you just didn't see any of the traits. The balls are floating, they're sailing, the accuracy, the ball velocity is not there. So I wouldn't feel great about any of those guys. But yeah, so I think it's kind of that middle four you feel pretty good about. Another one just to kind of throw out there is Tyson Baggett from Shepherd. In terms of arm talent and size, he kind of was going throw for throw with Will Levis-ish in the, I think Will Levis has a better arm, but he's another guy, some traits, but you're very limited. You're kind of scraping the bottom of the bucket there a little in terms of guys that you think could even project to playing starting quarterback in the NFL. And I know there's been a lot of success stories. Brock Purdy, Taylor Heineke's played a lot of football, but you don't bet on those guys. And those guys are kind of later round, seventh free agent type guys, in my opinion.
Just to clean up aisle information here. Hendon Hooker's 25. He was born on January 13th, 1998. For reference, Sam Howell, 22, September 16th, 2000.
Right.
So just you're drafting a guy that's like basically 3 years older than your current starter.
Correct.
2.5 years older than your current starter. So there's that. All right. Wide receiver is another one that's interesting. And this is more of like, I'm curious where guys are going to go because it can push players up or down to Washington. Because kind of where they would want to trade down to potentially is where some of these receivers, it seems like, are starting to go.
Yeah.
There's not a Jamar Chase in this draft. There's not, some of these guys that have gone really, really high. I don't know if there's going to be a receiver that goes in the top 15. Quentin Johnston's probably wide receiver 1. I've seen him mocked occasionally in the top 15. But what do you make of this wide receiver class? And is there a need remotely for Washington to get one? Or is this a position they probably completely ignore in this draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always want receiver depth. So I think they do kind of, they definitely kick the tires on some of these guys. Like a guy that stood out to me was Jake Bobo from UCLA. He's 6'5". He got some special teams value. Maybe he's your Cam Sims, AT.
They did just acquire Marcus Kemp, though, from Kansas City.
Right. But I think you just want a nice competitive room. And if you're looking for traits, there's guys in this class that have traits. So what I will say is, to me, Quentin Johnston's the number one guy just because he's a freak, man. He's got like 35-inch arms, 34.5-inch arms, which is insane for a receiver. He's 6'4", and he runs routes. I hate to make this comparison, but he throws his feet into the ground the way like a Julio Jones does. So that kind of explosive, that physicality. He doesn't catch the ball overly great, which is why he's not going to be a top 10 guy. But I do think he's better than people want to give him credit for. I think, Max Duggan was throwing to him, and they're like, oh, he wasn't productive against Georgia. And if you go watch the Georgia game, it's like he's open a lot. He's beating guys, but the ball is just not there. The ball's late, whatever. So he, to me, is receiver 1 just because he's a freak. I know Francis Smith-Njigba gets a ton of hype, and at the combine, he looked great. He didn't play a lot last year because he had a hamstring injury, but he's like kind of that hyper smooth Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown type of receiver, not overly fast, but really savvy route runner that in the right system could be very effective. The next guy is Mario Addison, I think, and Mario Addison had like a disappointing combine. So he's the Biletnikoff Award winner from Pittsburgh in 2001, and then he transferred to USC. And everyone kind of said the film wasn't as good.
Jordan Addison.
What I say, Mario Addison?
Mario Addison.
Jordan Addison.
Former Ron Rivera player.
Correct.
Mario Addison,
Carolina guy.
Defensive end. Carolina.
Yeah. So Jordan Addison, and I like him. I like his film a lot, but he didn't run very well. He ran like a 4.56. Didn't have great explosive measurables, and so you're kind of like, he's not a big man. Those are always kind of red flags with receivers, especially if that top speed number isn't where you thought it. It's not the end all be all. His film's very good, but with receivers specifically, like for example, the kid from Cincinnati in this year's draft was supposed to run a 4.2, and he runs a 4.56 almost. It's almost a 4.6. So you're like, it doesn't. Something's not matching up here, and
Right.
it's a big red flag. So I would say, obviously, none of those guys get a ringing endorsement. They all have kind of very specific issues and very specific fits, but that's kind of, I'd say, would characterize the wide receiver class.
All right, tight end.
Yeah.
To me, hold on. Before we even get into this class, they are oddly, I want to say oddly satisfied at tight end, because I'm with you that I like a lot of these guys
Yeah.
in theory, but the Logan Thomas thing doesn't really make sense to me. Like, you can save a lot of money, and I guess if you're not really going to spend a lot of money, then you don't need to save it. Like,
Right.
you don't need to slash one area of your budget if you're not going to spend that money elsewhere. But it seems like, in the same way, I'm going to make a basketball analogy, so you're really going to follow along here. The Wizards traded Rui Hachimura because they needed to get more minutes from Deni Advia. There was a jam at the position. They needed to, and they liked the player that was not getting as much minutes more than the guy that was, so they trade the guy who's going to be a pending free agent, yada, yada, yada. There's only so many snaps to be available. They have all these young dudes. Logan Thomas started to look a little bit more like himself at the end of last year, but you can save a decent chunk of change by cutting him. I don't really get why they're keeping Logan Thomas. Good locker room guy, good player, but to me, it just seems like moving on and letting these young guys go, and maybe even drafting one of these younger, one of the tight ends in one of the deepest tight end classes. Daniel Jeremiah called it the best tight end class he's ever seen, at least in the last decade. That would be a smart play.
It's
a good use of finances.
It's a very deep tight end class, but I understand why you're keeping Logan Thomas. I think if you think he's got, tread on the tire, and get a new offensive coordinator who likes to use tight ends, and he's experienced and he catches the football well, and he was very productive 2 years ago, I can see why you'd keep him. And that happens every once in a while. You've been around, the NFL long enough, Craig, to know that's a thing that happens. So we do like the upside of the young players. But I also think it's nice having a kind of an experienced vet to kind of helm and direct that room for a year. And if you like Logan, you think he's going to be productive this year, maybe that young guy ascension is 2 years away. So, we'll see. They can still cut him. It's not like anything crazy is happening. So.
They could also very easily get through the spring, see that like Cole Turner's made a massive leap, and be like, sorry, Logan, you're going to be a post June 1 cut.
Right.
And you wind up, if you do it that way, you save $7 million on the cap basically, and you have dead cap of 1.75 the next 2 years.
Right.
So very affordable. If you do it pre June 1, it's 3.5 dead cap this year. You save 5.17.
Yeah. So doesn't that feel like that's probably the direction they would go? Post June 1, if you're doing.
But
anything.
I mean, you can designate him and do it now, but like it allows you to get through the spring, and if for whatever reason Logan doesn't look great, and a Cole Turner or a Curtis Hodges or a Amari Rodgers is like ready to go QB1, and or you drafted a guy that turns out to be like, whoa, we got something here.
Yeah.
Then you can make that decision then. And by the way, if they're still in the middle of the Daron Payne negotiations, opening up $7 million might be something that's worth it at that point, and they don't feel like they need it right now.
Dude, 100%. I think that's exactly right. That's kind of what it feels like. So you just kind of, it's a little insurance policy. The guys don't come along. You got some guy with an experience. So I think they're probably in a good spot. And with regards to the tight ends in the class, it's a very, very deep tight end class. There's a lot of really good football players. So, if you wanted to, if people are like, are they going to draft a tight end? I don't think so. But let's say you're sitting there in the third round and one of these guys is staring you in the face like a really good football player. I can see them taking a flyer, third, fourth, fifth round. Like, that's how deep this class is. There's going to be a good football player way later in the draft. So we're not in the business of passing up on good football players. So if that's the best value on your board at that point, you're going to take one. And like, that's what I would keep an eye on if you're a fan, is it's a very deep running back class. It's also a very deep tight end class. It's a very deep edge rusher class. So as the board starts to fall, even though those are kind of positions of strength, quote unquote, for this team, they are going to pick one of those players because at some point a running back, tight end, or edge rusher are going to be the best player on their board.
By the way, this is an incredible tight end name class.
It's a great name.
Just based off names alone. Dalton Kincaid, that name. Dude's a tight end.
Yep.
Darnell Washington, Luke Musgrave, Sam Laporta.
Great names.
You got Luke Schoonmaker. Are you kidding me?
Schoonmaker from Michigan, yeah.
Have you ever heard a better tight end name than Luke Schoonmaker?
Yeah.
Besides, the Michigan great Jake Butts, of course.
Jake Butts. Dude, they're all great names, and they're all good. And that's the crazy thing is they're all good football players, and they're all kind of high upside athletes. Like Laporta, everyone thought was going to run slow, comes around and runs like a 4.52, and his film's
Yeah.
excellent. So you're like, oh well, like he's going to be a baller. He's probably
By the way,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna make another dumb joke. You please finish your point.
No, it's. I'm just saying, like they're like everyone. He's like the third or fourth tight end in this class who's got awesome film, and he's running fast. He jumped high. He catches the football well, and you're like, oh shoot. Or like the kid from Cincinnati, Josh Wiley, caught the football better than any receiver at the combine. Like he was so smooth catching the football, and he's going to be probably a 5th-round selection. So it's like, I remember when I was watching him, he caught the football like Travis Kelce. Now he doesn't move like Travis Kelce, but like
Who does?
that excellent, the hands, the body control. And I was like, this guy in any other year is a 2nd-round pick, but because this is such a deep class, like he's going to be pushed down. So I think it's just a really compelling class in that way. And there's a lot of really talented football players. And these are just the guys that were at the combine. There are other guys that aren't even listed that are very good football players as well.
Yeah. Leonard Taylor sounds like he's a consultant on Capitol Hill, but that's okay. The rest of these guys sound like tight ends. Also, shout out Ryan Miller. You don't get a lot of Furman prospects, and as someone who grew up 30 minutes from Furman in Greenville, South Carolina, shout out to him.
Real quick, just while we're shouting somebody out, let's talk about Zach Kuntz real quick from Old Dominion, kind of a local boy, right? He 6'8",
you in the house,
6'8". I think he was 262. He ran a 4.5 40. He had a 41-inch vertical, and he had an 11.1 broad. So he just tested insanely. Film's a little up and down, but like if you're looking for a guy with like tremendous, we talked about traits at the tight end position, doesn't get much more traity than that. So keep an eye on that guy at some point in the draft.
That is a big, gigantic, athletic human.
Jumping,
Yeah. Last offensive position to touch on real quick, and then we'll wrap with a couple of defensive looks. Running back.
Oh,
it seems like they need one late in the draft. They kind of need to replace the J.D. McKissick role. Obviously, Robinson's going to be their RB1. Gibson's going to be their RB2. Gibson extension eligible. I doubt he's going to get it. And you could very easily move on from him after this year, depending on what kind of year he has and what kind of check he's going to require. But they still need a third. And I know Jarrett Patterson is someone that like excited MJD when he was on with us. But what do you think of this running back class and the ability to get someone in that third down back role late?
I mean, so just to give you some context, like when you go to the combine, you watch the drills, and there's the guys that stand out. You say, oh, there's probably 5 or 6 guys in this group that are excellent. The running backs got up there, and I'm not even kidding. For the first 6, 7 drills, there was not a drop ball. No one missed a cut. No one fell down. No one did everything. Everyone looked excellent. So 20 guys deep. And I was like, they all look fantastic. And then I was like, well, maybe I'm just being biased. It's the last day of the combine. I talked to a couple coaches that were still around, a couple scouts. And the first thing they say was, could you believe that running back group? So the point being is that there are a lot of good running backs. Now, Washington is looking for a very specific type of running back, a kind of a pass-catching third down guy. So a guy like the A. Chayton from Texas A&M, who ran the fastest 40 for the running backs, is an interesting opportunity. I think he's probably gone in the 3rd round. Like that's where good running back value is. Gray from Oklahoma catches the football very well. There's just so many guys. Deuce Vaughn from Kansas State. He's a small guy, but hyper quick, kind of choice runner. Darren Sproles.
He's like 5'6".
Yeah.
What is it with the 5'6" dudes from K-State?
I don't know. They just take flyers on him, but he's a heck of a football player. And so there's 3 dudes right there that are like in a class full of guys that are really good. Keaton Mitchell from ECU I think he had the fastest GPS time of any running back in college football last year. And he's like a big play waiting to happen. He ran a 4.37 at the combine. So they're just if you want a running back, there will be one available. It's just kind of what you like. Like Evan Hull from Northwestern had one of the craziest combine performances I've seen, not because of the testing, because in the drill work, every time he touched the football, he would sprint 80 yards for a touchdown. He would literally catch the ball and run 80 yards to a touchdown like an absolute psycho. And I could just go through every one of these guys and be like, they'll probably be on an NFL team next year. Chase Brown, his twin brother, Sidney Brown from Illinois, he caught the football well. He ran well. He's physical. He's like that bodybuilder style. Zach Corbenet from UCLA. He's 6'2", 225, catches the football excellent. He kind of has this elite vision, and you're just like, man, anybody, just go down the list. I'm just reading down the list, and everyone's awesome. And I haven't even talked about the 2 best guys. So it's a fantastic class. You can find somebody kind of wherever. And so don't get locked in on anybody. Oh, we didn't take HA. We didn't take, Keaton Mitchell. We didn't take Eric Gray. There's like 1,000 good running backs, and probably the best route running guy not named Gibbs, or what's the Gibbs from Alabama's name? I'm messing up. Jahmyr Gibbs is the kid from Tulsa who was absolutely murdering the Senior Bowl. So there's just so many good backs in this class. There's like 6-7 guys right there. So, Washington fans, like, they will probably pick one. It probably someone you never heard of, and they're probably a good player. So
yeah, which is nice. Getting kick return, punt return could also be helpful out of that position. Something else to keep an eye on.
Sure.
For some other
Tajay
other
Spears.
positions
Sorry,
as
that
well.
was his name. Tajay Spears. There we go. Found it.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. All right, let's wrap up with some defensive guys. That's Logan Paulson, of course. I'm Craig Hoffman. If you want more from Logan, at Logan_Paulson82 on Instagram. You can hit me on Twitter at Craig Hoffman or at Hoffman Show. All right, let's get into some defensive guys. I really just want to focus in on 2 positions because we did the
DBs.
We did the DBs yesterday. Edge guys.
Yeah.
Not a position of need, but a very important position to watch for Washington because it's a premier position. It could knock guys that they need down to 16 potentially. What do you see out of this position where it's considered one of the best, best groups that we've had in a while?
It's just, again, it's very deep, and it's kind of like depending on what you're looking for, like you could probably find a guy like, so everyone's talking about Adebarwe, excuse me, from Northwestern, who kind of broke the combine. He ran a 4.49 at 280 pounds. He jumped great. His drill work looked so clean. His footwork was great. I was kind of hoping he'd slide to like the middle of the second, maybe be there and play at 48 for Washington. But after that, no chance in hell. So he's an excellent football player. I think a guy like Yaya Daibi from Louisville, his film's okay, but he kind of tested so well. He was like a poor man's Adebarwe, you know what I mean? He was like kind of in that same big. He's 275. He's 6'4". I think he ran a 4.52. Like inside outside pass rush ability, violent hands. A guy that's going to slide a little bit because his film's not. It's fine, but it's not elite. So I think there's just name a guy. Like there's a lot of good guys. The kid from San Jose State, Foyoko, I think it's his name. He's got heavy hands, inside outside pass rush ability. He'll be available later in the draft. Like, it just depends on what you're looking for. Like Nick Hampton's a pass rush specialist. Is that what you want with some special teams upside? He's a smaller guy, really twitchy, very violent to contact. He has like tremendous power for being a smaller guy. Is he a guy you bring in on 3rd down and say, hey, Chase, bump into 3 technique or whatever? Like you can find somebody. What is Washington looking for specifically? I think they're looking for like a bigger inside outside guy, but maybe they're looking for like a guy who's just got juice. And everyone's going to say, oh, what about Will McDonald IV? I hate to break it to you, he's probably going to go in the 1st round. So, you're looking for someone later, probably one of these other names that not super familiar with, but there's a lot of good rushers. There's a lot of kind of different stylistic guys. And it's just about saying, this is who we're going to find. This is our fit. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity for guys like that.
Yeah. I think some people might try to get ahead of themselves and say, well, they need to find the replacement for Chase or Montez because if they're going to sign Duran, they can't possibly keep all of them. And that's true.
Right.
But you don't need to find that guy now.
Right.
And in fact, there's a little bit of an advantage of doing it next year because, yes, that guy is going to have to start as a rookie, but he was a 1st rounder. Then okay, that's what you do. And you can keep the clock like pushed out on paying him and have the money because like the rookie contracts escalate, not by a ton, but the lower the number, obviously, the better. So that to me is like where they are at edge. If they can pick up that rotation piece, great. They can probably do some of that in free agency potentially as well, including potentially re-signing F.A. Obata in terms of the inside-outside piece. And then in terms of finding the Shaka Tony, if you will, the end of rotation guy who's got a little bit of juice. Obviously, Shaka hasn't exactly produced a ton in the NFL. But if they find a guy like that late in the draft, great. The one position that is perhaps more of a need for them, depending on what they do with Cole Holcomb is linebacker. Now, they probably need depth there anyway. I know they liked guys like Dejon Harris, and they obviously elevated him towards the end of last year, and some of those guys played well in their limited roles. They re-signed Mayo, so they've got him as a depth piece. But what do you make of this linebacker class and where it could fit on the hierarchy of needs for the Commanders?
I think the linebacker, they'll probably draft somebody, and it's kind of a up and down linebacker group, I think, and that's kind of interesting. I think, like the guy that I like the best is Jack Campbell from Iowa. He's got a little bit of he's 6'5", 246 pounds, so a little bit of a traditional kind of
big man,
knock you in the face linebacker, but he plays with kind of Kuechly-esque instincts. He's reading screens, he's calling the defense, and I think he would be just an excellent kind of piece to complement Jamin. I think he just is kind of this big, smart. He tested way better than he thought. I think the testing numbers are going to push him up, and as a result, kind of push him out of Washington's price range. Henley from Washington State is a converted receiver to linebacker whose film is incredible to watch. He tested well. The kid from Duke, Shaka Hayward, he reminds me like a 1-to-1 of Jamin, and they tested about the same. So if you have a style, a long-armed, kind of smarter version, like a more polished version of Jamin, like he'll be available probably in the 5th, 6th round. So I do think it's someone they're going to target. I just think it's not like the running back class. It's not like the tight end class. It's not like the D-line class where it's very deep kind of throughout. It's like there are a couple names on this list where I'm like, target this guy. Like you need to kind of be specific here and kind of hone in on a skill set. Dorian Williams from Tulane, again, tested very high, 34.5-inch arms, long arms for a guy. They kind of like that in their linebackers, really snappy and twitchy. A little bit of a project, but again, in the 5th, 6th round, like maybe even the 4th round, that's excellent depth for this team. So those are some names to kind of keep an eye on. But again, it's not like, hey, throw a stone, you're going to hit a good one. It's like you really got to trust your evaluation here and make sure that it's fitting your vision for the team.
Definitely. All due respect to the specialists, we're not going to talk about the specialists. The Washington is set. They've got their guys. They used a draft pick, a kind of absurdly high one, on Cameron Cheeseman a couple years ago. Trustway is as good as it gets.
Feel pretty good about that evaluation, huh?
Good job, Joey Sly. So that pretty much covers it. We got all the O-line yesterday. We got quarterback. We got edge. We check all them boxes.
And if you guys want us to cover someone we didn't talk about, just leave a comment. Yeah. Maybe we'll do like a 5-minute, 10-minute segment at the end of the next episode or something.
Yeah, actually, that would be great if there's any specific prospects, because like I've gotten questions, for instance, over the last couple of days of like, okay, let's say Gonzalez. If Gonzalez goes high and Witherspoon or Joey Porter Jr. is on the board, like who fits Washington's scheme better? So like questions like that, I think are really great and can be very insightful, and we can certainly do those amongst ourselves. We'll also try to get some of our draft buddies on. But the biggest thing we got moving forward is free agency as well. So definitely we'll try to check in on some of the free agent news as that comes. Obviously, still waiting on the sale. I'm sure that will make its way into the podcast as that happens as well. So lots happening to talk about, even though it is the middle of March. By the way, when the hell did it become the middle of March?
I know. It's a trip.
What are we doing? All right. What we're doing, we're ending the podcast. If you like what you heard and you're not subscribed, go ahead. Do that right now. Click follow on Spotify. Subscribe in Apple Podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you're checking out Logan's work as well. Logan_Paulson82 on Instagram. I'm on Twitter at Craig Hoffman. I'm also on Instagram, starting to post a little bit more stuff there as well. Craig_Hoffman. All right. That's it. That's all. That's the podcast. See you next week on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.